Yeah, it's kind of weird that Musk is kind of out there almost like casting for different political entities, But I kind of find I'd say Musk as much as anybody, they don't pick up the nuances of politics on this side of the Atlantic at all.
Well, this is my issue with Musk. Like, this is, like, I would have been, like, writing about him maybe 2 years ago in curiosity as to what's he trying to do here. Now I can see what he was trying to do. We have, you've been writing about this at the weekend. We have Trump's inauguration next week's time, and Musk's been a big part of that.
Yeah.
And my issue is not issue; it's question. Really is. Well, America's a country he's lived and worked and set up businesses in, and he knows it intimately. And we all would have thought a lot went wrong in 2020. But when you start moving out of your country into, say, like the UK, and making big comments on, we'll say, Nigel Farage a week and a half ago, saying he shouldn't be the leader of the UK Reform Party, and, promoting Tommy Robinson. When I look at a situation like that, I say, you don't know enough about what you're talking about in that scenario, possibly.
That's right. But, there's another side of that which is positive, in that it immediately is something quite unexpected, which is that it's almost like a world revolution that's in train, The Trump operation is reaching out into Europe, to Germany, the AfD, and they're the kind of so-called far right of Germany, and reaching out to reform in the UK, as they say, and they don't quite get it in either case, I think. But it's interesting that they're not just parochial-minded about it, or that at least it's hard to say, who Musk is in this context. Is he a messenger from Trump, or is he working on his own? Is this his own initiative? Is he the head of Twitter, who's kind of doing a nixer in the political zone, and will then go back and do this dull job that he's got in America, although I don't think it's going to be very dull at all in the government. I don't know, it's quite unclear. But yeah, he's, like, I find that a lot with American commentators. They're interested in Ireland, but they don't know anything about it. They don't kind of they have no feel for it, because their notions are all kind of cliched and caricatured and way out of date. They're kind of going back almost to NORAID and all that kind of stuff. And when they look for somebody, they get the wrong person to talk about it, and it comes across very flat and uninteresting. When you think about it, like, here we are, like, next Monday, like, it's going to be the beginning of a sensational period in the life of the world. Never mind America and Ireland. It's just the whole world, because there's so many moving parts and so many tectonic plates going here at the same time, that it's almost impossible to imagine what it would be like. So, I mean, that's what I've been kind of trying to do, is trying to get into the mood of it and to see the possibilities of it. I mean, there's a lot of people I find on our side who just want to kill it stone dead, and just say, no, we know who Musk is. We know who Trump is. He's a Zionist, all this nonsense. And I don't buy any of that, because I don't think it's relevant. We're in a completely different world from Monday next, because now these guys, they're making history.
Well, I agree with you, because, like, in this sense, is you can see the background music to this next week is starting to play. And you kind of use the example of, like, a big part of Trump getting elected this time was Elon Musk and about 10 podcasts in America that were, broadly speaking, you might say, comedians podcasts, but they had huge reach.
Yeah.
So what I'm noticing about, say, Joe Rogan is, like, Mark Zuckerberg has come out on it there in the last day or two, and Facebook have dropped now all of a sudden all of their fact-checking stuff to kind of more or less map what Musk has rolled out. When I compare this lead up to the one in 2016 when Trump won, when there was none of these characters, it's like they're preparing for what he's going to do as opposed to attacking what he's going to do.
Yeah.
And they're getting ready for it in some ways. The way I kind of have been just oddly curious about how people like that, you know, the billionaire class, if you like, are taking a softly approach this time.
Yeah.
It's not as, you know, there's no battle cries this time around from the people you'd have expected.
We see, that opens up an area that for me is problematic in the sense that I don't know which I'm looking at.
Yeah.
You know, am I looking at an organic, naturalistic political drama playing out? Or am I looking at something that is heavily influenced by extraneous elements who control the whole grid?
You could be looking at both.
Or both. Yeah, exactly. If you think about only the control grid and the predator class, or the combine as I call them, you know, now they have control of Trump and his administration type of thing. I don't buy that, but I don't buy it. But if that were the case, then you naturally go into pessimism mode. You naturally go into, this is going nowhere, this is going to be a disaster, this is going to be the worst ever, because now they're going to pull this stunt whereby, this is the yarn, that they're going to kind of be the kind of democratic, you know, open, free speech, blah, blah, blah. But we'll end up in the same place that we would have ended up with Klaus Schwab and the other gang. That's this yarn. I don't buy it. The other part of that then is the personalities, the people that I see. And the people I know, and I watch, you know, and I always say to people, we have to be able to continue to trust the intuitive instruments that we have, that we developed in our lives. Because if we don't, then we might as well just forget about it. That's the only weapon we have, the only instrument we have. I look at these guys, I look at Trump, and I've done a lot of watching of him in videos, in documentaries, and reading books about him. And, you know, I think I understand broadly. I've never met anybody like him, but I understand, I think, where he's coming from. And I can anticipate his responses to things. Musk is a much more enigmatic figure. But I started off liking him a lot for his personality and his sense of openness and vulnerability and passion and humour also. And I just like the idea of him. But I'm also aware, and this is, people are constantly reminding me of these things as if I hadn't already said them. Like that, you know, of course his interests are in all the things that the predators want to get in place, right? The brain chips, the surveillance, the satellites, all that, you know, the driverless cars, whatever. So that, you know, he could be a one-man supplier to the combine for all their needs for the next, you know, the rest of time type of thing. But you see, again, I look at him and I think, is he a good guy? I've had this metaphor which people didn't really kind of get. I call him a hero on a zebra. And the idea of the zebra is that it's an ambiguous thing. Is it a black horse with white stripes or a white horse with black stripes? That's the idea. So if it's a black horse, it's bad news. If it's a white horse, it's good news. So he's a zebra for the moment. But I think now that it's a white horse. And there is that yarn where it's going about, which I never quite believed, it's a QAnon or whatever, yarn about the white hats. That the story of Trump from the beginning was that he was approached by these guys who were kind of an alternative bunch of oligarchs to the bad guys, right? Who were looking askance at what was happening. And I always had that feeling, there's got to be these guys. There's got to be these guys. You know, this is just natural. Why wouldn't there be? You would expect there to be. And that they're not going to allow these scum to take over the world without a fight. I really always believed that. And that they went to Trump and said, will you run for president? We need you. You're the man. And that they had a lot of parts of the military behind them and so on. Now, you know, I kind of came and went on that narrative. I've spent some time listening to it and getting quite buoyed up by it. And then I thought, no, it's too slow. It's not happening. This is all fake. I began to decide that Q was some kind of psyop, which it probably was anyway. But now I kind of think, what if Musk is the main man of the white hats? Because the way he's been doing in the last few weeks, in particular, just swanning around the world, appearing all over the place, you know, talking to the AfD in Germany, and I don't mean literally, but with the Reform Party in the UK, and taking a deep interest in everything. You kind of think, oh, this isn't just Trump.
This is where my concern about him comes in. I go back to the first piece I wrote about him on my Substack was after he had that interview where he smoked the joint on the Joe Rogan. That was a fascinating exchange on that podcast that I thought Joe Rogan should have explored more. And I went back to his childhood as, I think the question was more or less, when did you understand, you were a lot different? And Joe Rogan was really only talking about his intellectual capabilities. And the way he answered it was, well, he kind of knew he was strange when he was 4 or 5. And that this was going to be some sort of a problem for him in negotiating the world around him. And he used the word useful about himself 2 or 3 times in that part of the interview where it was, he wanted to be useful to humanity, basically. Almost as in, and kind of I think in that interview he acknowledged he's probably on the spectrum. Most of these billionaire class seem to be a kind of almost photo fit type of, I don't know, autism, too strong a word, but Musk always has seemed a bit different to me. There was more humanity in him. But that interview said to me, I went, and I wrote the article at the time about it was, this is coming from a good place because he knows emotionally there's some way he's different to the regular guy or girl.
Yeah.
But here, in exchange for kind of having me in the group, here's what I can do kind of thing.
Yeah. I see. I think so. Now, I mean, obviously, there's a bit of a fly in the ointment in there because, in the sense that what Musk might think is useful for humanity might not be what humanity might regard as useful to itself. He might think flying us all off to some place out in the outer stratosphere might be good for us. I don't want to go there, but at the same time, I think if you look at it in a different way, allowing these people and forget all the noise and babble about them, but just look at them as people, as men and women. If you look at like Tulsi Gabbard, if you look at RFK Jr., you look at Musk, look at Trump, look at even Vance, although Vance probably is the least known of the figure. Although we do know stuff about him, but it just doesn't accord with what he looks like. The book he wrote was brilliant.
Well, we know because of what he's told us from the book.
Yeah, if you just read the book and you had what are all those parade, identity parade of people, and Vance was in it, you'd never pick him out as the author of this book because he looks like a complete, banker or something, But the one thing with RFK Jr., one thing again, and Tulsi, and Musk, when they speak, and Trump as well, when they speak passionately about the good of the world, the good of humanity. That's a big change from the last 5 years, when every politician prates on about democracy while taking it away and abusing the people who elected them and treating them like dirt. This is a complete change. Now, but I welcome that. I get into trouble with some people for this, but I actually want this. I want it desperately. That political life will actually have a human quality again. And I think that's happening. So, now, for example, one of the tropes that keep coming up is this idea that, Trump is a Zionist. The evidence for this is apparently that his son-in-law was a Jew, and also he wore a kippah at the Wailing Wall in 2017. Well, okay, the idea of wearing the kippah, you wear it in a religious context out of politeness. It's like wearing a sprig of shamrock on St. Patrick's Day, which the President of the United States does all the time. But in the last couple of days, we've seen that, Trump was supposed to be in the pocket of Netanyahu. He's now completely given the 2 fingers to Netanyahu. Netanyahu is not coming to the inauguration next week. On Truth Social, he's put out a video of Jeffrey Sachs tearing strips off Netanyahu, calling him like a bad son of a bitch. Trump has actually tweeted this. This is the guy who's supposed to be in Netanyahu's pocket. And it's what it's about, as I understand it, is that Netanyahu wanted Trump to attack Iran first thing on the Tuesday morning, or maybe the Monday evening after the inauguration. And Trump said, no, I'm not doing that. And then Netanyahu went behind his back to Biden's people and asked them to do it before Trump came in. In other words, that Trump would be presented with a fait accompli, which is the nastiest trick. So I think that's the end of Trump and Netanyahu.
Well, it's a probably good analogy to, now if we trace back the Netanyahu-Trump relationship to his last presidency,
yes,
they had a very tight relationship.
They did.
They got peace deals done with Iran and other countries, like bilateral peace agreements towards the end of Trump's presidency that didn't get much airtime because it was kind of during COVID and all this kind of stuff. And Trump had provided indications that when he said he'd do something, he'd do it. And the example I'd give there is, for several administrations, the US had promised to move the US embassy, I think, from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, but because of the connotations of doing it, nobody had ever done it, but Trump went in and did it. That was significant to, people like Netanyahu. But I think that's the thing with Trump, though. He'll walk the road with you until he won't.
Yeah.
And Musk might find this out in the next... I think this is a thing Musk could find out, because I would imagine that the amount of kind of media supply that Musk is getting around the world now, on the political side, he's not stood back behind the curtain after the election.
That is an alarming thought, because I mean, I know that's an aspect of Trump's personality. He wouldn't like being overshadowed. He doesn't like playing second fiddle. Like, I think there come a moment he said, no, I'm the president, But then again, Bobby Kennedy and himself fell out before as well, and Bobby's back now, and that's the kind of thing Trump doesn't. He bears grudges, but he doesn't bear grudges. He's a strange character like that. He's dirty player when you do him down. I mean, do him. But he actually, I heard Piers Morgan talking about that. That they fell out and Trump was slagging him off good, royally for months on end, and then one morning the phone rang and it was Trump, and he said, "Hi, Piers. Are we okay?"
But I think that comes from maybe a character that is, in a certain sense, shallow. It's very easy to fall out with him. But because he doesn't feel things deeply, it's impossible to kind of hurt him deeply, in a sense.
Yeah.
That there'll be an opportunity for him to say, "Oh, myself and Netanyahu, we're best friends," in 2 years' time.
Yeah,
if things turn out the way he wants them to.
Of course. But I think what he's doing here is very clever, in the sense that he's creating distance between himself and Israel at this moment, because he knows that connection could get him into trouble. And that's what people say about Netanyahu, that he's very manipulative, and, he can suddenly dump you in a situation that you didn't know you were heading into. And Trump's kind of got aware of that. So I think, because this is vital, that, he can't allow the Israelis to dictate his policy, and they could very well start doing that, But again, this is what I like about this, is that it's organic. It doesn't correspond to the prognostications that you're hearing from our side, that Trump is, definitely going to sell us all down the river to and into slavery and blah, blah. I don't believe that for a moment. I think Trump is, he's 78 years of age. He wants to go down in history as the man who saved the world. There's no doubt about it. I think he does. And that the way to do that will be to do the opposite of what our people are saying at the moment, by and large, that he's going to do. And that's my hope. I would like it to last 4 years, that hope. But I enjoy it. I feel good about it, I'm not going to kind of cave into the kind of negative side of it. Of course, bad stuff can happen. Things can go wrong. My only fear, really, is that they will find a way to divert him like they did in 2020.
Well, I think I think they will try to manage him better. I think they tried to take him out in 2020. I think they spent most of the post-2016 election trying to take him out. Now they know that doesn't work. That's not going to work short of an assassination. And in a sense, there's a kind of negotiation going on, whether it's verbal or not, is that a lot of the characters are starting to step back a few paces to give him some room, but also make sure he doesn't walk past them too far, if you know what I mean, and their interests too far, if you like. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's, that's better. That's a hell of a lot better than what things were.
Isn't there also a sense that feeling or that kind of ripple of discussion that has been going on for maybe a few months now, that, woke is dead or close to it, that, there's a change coming in public culture? Now that's different to again, you were talking about organic, natural versus, control grid, But there's a certain sense, I think, here that maybe, for whatever reason and in whatever way, that the control grid has started to move with that cultural shift. Maybe. Now that could be a bad thing in a certain sense, that they want to control the game and keep in it. Or it could be in a certain kind of acquiescence in the conditions the underfoot conditions that have developed. Because you must remember that, notwithstanding the disappointments, say for example, in the last year in Ireland with the elections and so on, we in the resistance have to really, be aware that we've done very well to be still here, and still fighting. I remember Matthias Desmet said that at the way early on, he says, because I remember actually asking him in an interview like that, well, what do we do? And he said, the thing is to just continue speaking the truth, because that, he says, will reduce the cruelty that people have to suffer. I thought it was a very beautiful way of putting it, and that has proven the case. So we haven't gone away. And in America, the deplorables, Trump's people, have not gone away. And Trump has not gone away. Like, when you think of what he's gone through, I can't imagine. I mean, I've gone through a fair bit of stuff over the years with different things. It's taken a lot out of me. It doesn't seem to knock a feather off him. He's like 1,000 times worse. Yeah. The stuff like the lawfare stuff and the abuse he takes, and he just seems to love it. And he comes bouncing back. He's been in now 10 years, he's been fighting these battles.
But you see, he's been fighting them all his life. When I was 16, I spent a summer in New York. And the summer I happened to be there, his companies in New York City were on the brink. He was on bankruptcy's door. This is like 1990.
Yeah.
And at the same time, he was moving from wife number 1 to wife number 2, which was Ivanka Trump and Marilyn Maples.
Yeah.
And it was like, New Yorkers were very fond of Ivanka, his first wife, and they saw them as a kind of a power couple kind of thing. But every single day, the New York Post, front page Trumps, it was either with his businesses or with these relationships or affairs or whatever it was. And I was like, in 2020, I was looking at me and I said, this guy's dealing with this for 30 years already. He's well prepared. Like, he wasn't possibly prepared, but this is the life he's lived.
Yeah, I watched a documentary or a 3-parter on that whole thing, and it was really amazing, and you get a great sense of what kind of person he is. Now, there's a little bit of a dark side to Trump, for sure, in the personal dimension, but he's also very kind of like gauche in a certain way. What you see is what you get, by and large. He speaks.
You can't fake that for all your life.
No.
Like, do you know what I mean? Yeah. I don't think you can anymore.
No, I don't think so. And when you look particularly at him as a young man, it's very interesting. I mean, you look at him as a young man, and he's so soft-spoken. He reminded me of Elvis, the way he would speak so calmly and quietly, And I remember an interview where he was asked, when he was only about early 30s, I think, would you ever consider running for president? No, he says, it's such a mean life. Such a mean life, and it's just so, it's so unlike the Trump now. But I think that Trump now is in a certain sense, is an evolutionary kind of creature that has come out of like The Apprentice in particular. He learned how to be a total kind of,
Yeah, I never thought of that actually.
Yeah, because he developed that. It's almost like he developed.
It's like that extra layer of guard from the
and that's kind of essential. I mean, because you couldn't imagine the young Trump being able to put up with this stuff and to kind of come back out bouncing and so defiant and so kind of smart and so sharp with his tongue, and the lines he comes up with like that, he just comes out with it, and I wouldn't like to take on Trump. I don't think anybody really would.
No, I wouldn't want to
lose.
You're going to lose. Like, what do you think he's going to come out with in the first? I have a feeling he's going to come out swinging when he gets into office in terms of kind of executive orders and stuff like that.
I think so.
What do you think? Where do you think?
Well, I think he's made it clear free speech is a priority. He's going to kind of make sure that, and I think that will spread with like a contagion through the free world, through the former free world. The former free world will become free again. You know, the world that they closed down in 2020, unless they can find. I don't want to tempt fate by saying, you know, these guys are. There's a lot of dark forces out there, but I think that's one of his priorities. There are all kinds of things. I mean, I'm not clear in my head what this stuff is about Canada and Greenland. I don't know what kind of a game he's playing there, because in a certain sense, I mean, Steve Bannon has been talking about it, you know, but the last time I checked on Steve Bannon's CV, he described himself as a populist nationalist, you know, and now he's kind of a populist imperialist or something, you know.
Well, Steve Bannon, to me, is that he's centred himself now as the voice of the MAGA movement, if you like.
Yeah.
The diehards. I think that is true to a certain, like, there's certain truth there. But if you go back, Bannon, even to Breitbart, you know, they were always right of whatever the most right-wing news organisation were. And that was driven by, you know, Andrew Breitbart, but mostly by Stephen Bannon after Breitbart's death. But I think his instincts for what's going on, whether it was through COVID, whether it's the two election cycles or covering the impeachments, his instincts for what is going on are usually good, but he has a narrative.
Yeah, I thought he was a bit slow on the COVID thing. I mean, if you remember that the thing was called War Room Pandemic. I didn't have any quotation marks, you know. But there is, you're right. I mean, there was one of the most telling things that I've seen about him and the character of him. And it's a very interesting character because it's not in any way vindictive or vicious in the normal sense, but he's just hard as nails. And that was what happened with Megyn Kelly.
Yeah.
Where she asked this question of Trump about his treatment of women, and he gave her this one-liner, you know, only Rosie O'Donnell, and you know, that was. But then Bannon intervened, and Bannon went after her.
Yeah. And
she eventually came out and said, "I understand why he came after me." He says, "Because there was so much at stake." And it was really nasty, because she got death threats and everything. It was really nasty. And I saw that eventually she went on with Bannon. She invited him on, and it was a most fascinating discussion.
Nothing personal.
Nothing personal at all.
It's like, that's the attitude.
They were together on the point. She agreed that Bannon had done the right thing at the right time, and that if he hadn't done it, Trump would never have become president. That's some admission. That she would have actually, and people like her, would have pushed that button so often, and that they would have closed Trump down. And that was such a good call by Bannon.
Well, I think, like, if when Bannon stepped into Trump's first campaign, he was 15 points down in the opinion polls.
Yeah.
He was just after that incident with, you know, the reporter where they had the audio clip of saying what he said.
Billy Bush, yeah.
He stepped in at that point and says, no, this isn't going to be a problem. When everybody else said, this is get out of the race.
Fight.
And Bannon's like, no.
Yeah.
So, like, his instincts are good, and I can see a developing enmity between the Musk and Bannon element, because the two of them, I think, would acknowledge they couldn't have won the election without each other.
Yeah. That's right. I remember that because the second, I think it was, Clinton debate with Clinton happened the Sunday after that event, and they stuffed the audience with Bill Clinton's victims.
Yeah.
And it was an ingenious move, like, it was just amazing. And that was the end of it. And was that the one where Trump was walking up and down behind her?
Yeah.
And that was what a theatrical, what a beautiful, amazing thing, like in the shadows, walking back as she was speaking. Like, oh, it was amazing. You see, there's a genius at work there. In Trump, to a high degree in Trump, but the people around him are attracted to the possibilities that he offers, because he's almost superhuman. This is the extraordinary thing about him. He is like somebody who is kind of not quite human in his capacities to endure what other people would regard as a tremendous grief and stress and basically fear of the future. He doesn't seem to fear anything.
That raises a question. A question in my head now as you're saying it is, because I think what you're kind of saying there is no one else could have waded through the shit to get to the other side except him. But now that we're on the other side of that swamp or slurry pit, at this point, when the coast is almost clear in a year's time or a year and a half time, say that's when some elements come in to gang up on
they will,
what they're doing.
But I think, okay. I'll qualify what I said there, because in the middle of the COVID thing, he was clearly in trouble.
A lot wrong, like.
He was struggling. He was struggling there. He didn't know which way to go. His instinct, I said, would have been to call it out. But he knew he couldn't get away with that, given how far it had gone down the road and the way that people had bought into it, had been made to buy into it. So he pulled back and went along with it. And I watched all through that, most of 2020, those nightly events. I watched them, almost all of them.
Yeah, they were, yeah.
And it was just incredible watching the tension and the dynamics, between himself and Fauci and that woman, Dr. Birx. Yeah, and really interesting. But what was at stake there was his presidency, was what he had achieved, not for himself purely or even at all, but for the people that were supporting him. And he wanted not to blow it. And that was where the fear came from, I think. The question that's in my head then, and I thought this was what you were going to ask me, but I'll address it anyway, is that in the event that there is a serious threat made against Trump, will he actually do what he's told by anybody? I don't believe so.
Oh, I don't believe he will either. But
So.
I wouldn't rule out how far people will go to eliminate him.
Well, the great fear is for his family.
Yeah,
that would be my fear.
And because
we're dealing with the darkest forces on the planet here, and so I think that, to me, insofar as it's just him, he's 78 years of age. By the time he gets out of this presidency, he'll be 82, 83. Like, this is it. This is his moment. And, if he's going to change the world, he's going to do it in the next 4 years. And I think he wants to do that. And he knows what needs to be done. Make no doubt about it. Like, even though there are certain things Trump doesn't speak about. He doesn't speak about the COVID thing. I believe he knows he was compromised because of the vaccine. And he went too far, in my view, in playing that game. But he was compromised. The story is, and I think I've begun to believe it, I didn't at first, was that he believed, or he understood, that the game was they were going to have a 3-year lockdown, which would have paralysed the world and caused no end of mayhem and death. And his only way out of it was warp speed, the vaccines. Now, I can understand that initiation, but once it started, he should have realised and should have said no. But you see, that other problem was people were buying into it.
Well, he only had 3. Well, the way I'd look at it is, I, like you, watched the daily press briefings that he did himself and bringing out his, the cast of characters that we've all come to know, like Fauci, Dr. Birx, a few others. But his initial instinct when COVID hit, you could tell he didn't want in any way to shut down the country and introduce mass restrictions. And he was fighting it every day. He said, we'll be back in 2, we'll be back in 3. Of course, it became an issue state by state, what happened in America, basically. But I could make this allowance in that he might have viewed the vaccination and the vaccine as a method to ensure that type of lockdown could not go on forever. But what we found out is it went on a year and a half after the vaccine.
But he was also at the mercy of a deeply corrupt press, media.
Yeah.
And they had him, by the ghoulies, like, really. They really did, because they had now, by the time he almost knew where he was, it was too late. The message had already gone out into the public and had been bought into by an awful lot of people. So by actually moving then against the COVID thing narrative, Trump would have been alienating quite a few of his own followers who had been duped. Now came out of that, and most of them came out of that in due course. But you know, the way, if you look at it in Ireland, like if you know anybody, I remember myself standing against it and taking illegal action. Like it was absolute mayhem, hell. Like for a year and a half, I couldn't walk down the street without being shouted at. It's only really stopped in the last year or so, and so like for Trump to actually take a stance like that would have been absolutely unconscionable, I think. I just think that, you know, going on then afterwards and talking about his beautiful vaccine and all this, like, was really daft.
You know, like, that
was unnecessary.
Like, well, there'll be always a question mark from me about that period of, and that issue, where I would attempt to give him allowances. He had about 3 months, like, you're talking about, he's in the middle of an election cycle.
Yeah.
The vaccine program, most people thought, well, a vaccine is going to take 5 or 10 years. You know, Operation Warp Speed, great. But a fast vaccine's like 5 years. And suddenly, from like June to November, we have one. And I certainly remember Pfizer, they were the first out, I think it was Pfizer. And it was 3 days after the presidential election.
Yeah.
And it was clearly a political decision to announce a vaccine at that point. And the way I'd kind of look at things is, well, if this was as serious and as bad as everybody's saying it is, you wouldn't delay this vaccine announcement by half a day.
No. The final answer to all of this, really, even though it doesn't tidy up all the questions, is the appointment of Bobby Kennedy. You know, like that he didn't have to do that. And that's inviting whatever it invites. I mean, we know what Bobby Kennedy stands for. We know he doesn't stop for anybody. There isn't a force on the planet that will stop him. He's almost, in that sense, as strong-willed as Trump is himself. He is determined. And I think that this will yield extraordinary results.
This, for me, will be the proof of the pudding about Kennedy when he gets in, to see if what he's been talking about he actually accomplishes and dismantles, if you like, what's in the kind of American health system or department. But I suppose in terms of where do you see the Trump Musk axis, if you look at it, how they might look at Ireland?
Well,
given the interest they're showing in the UK, Musk is shown in the UK.
Musk has made occasional references to Ireland, but they tend to be kind of uneducated, and they're just sort of in passing. Trump obviously knows about Ireland, and he's appointed Howard Lutnick as his Commerce Secretary. He'll be the guy who will be making decisions about taxation and corporations, or implementing it on the ground. And he has said very clearly that he's going to sort out, he cannot believe that Ireland is declaring massive balances of, and America is struggling. American industry is struggling, and he says he's going to put this to rights. That means that he's going to create a new taxation system, it seems to me, corporation tax, which will have the effect, or will be designed to have the effect, of causing a lot of American corporations to go back home. And that means that Ireland will be suddenly losing one of its main little earners, and not a little earner at all.
It's huge. I was writing about this last weekend. Corporation income tax is like 36% of the total take. And if the point I was making in that piece of writing was, even back at the heady days of the Celtic Tiger, that take was about 13%.
Yeah, and I mean
that means like a lot in terms of the tsunami that might come. If we thought the tsunami was bad.
Yeah, but when you factor in all the linkages as well, you're talking about a lot more than a third, say, as that suggests. You're talking about well over half of the economic activity is dependent on that sector that might well just get up one morning and leave. Now, my own view, and it's not particularly, on this, it's not what we're talking about, but my own view is that Ireland needs to bite that bullet sooner, and it's better to do it, sooner rather than later, because we have created a monster of an economy that is unsustainable and that is not sustaining its own people in Ireland. It's not capable of doing that, because one of the factors is the employment levels of outsiders. It's huge. I don't know the exact figure, but I know that, say, for example, Google The last time I checked, there were nearly over 90% of their employees in Ireland were not Irish. Now, this whole point about this in the beginning, when Charlie Haughey and Dermot Desmond came up with this scheme in the IFSC and all that, and that was when the whole thing started to draw in all of these different elements. The whole point was jobs for Irish people in their own country.
Yeah, and every net new job that is being created is increasingly being created for a person not living, never mind in the EU, outside of the EU. And that to me is a model that is looking to basically reduce labour costs, because they know the European model would, if I'm from France or Spain or Italy and move to Ireland, I expect a certain standard of living, certain standard of housing, and I'm not going to put up with, like, we have labour laws in our countries and, they're rigorous. Whereas if you look at the main inputs from the countries that are coming into Ireland, they're from Brazil, they're from India, they're from countries outside Nigeria. We've the Syrians, Afghan. They're from countries that will put up with a lot if they got here, because it's so much superior to where they're coming from. And to be presenting this as some sort of good-heartedness on our part, when really what you're trying to do is, over time, bring these people in to reduce your own cost of labor.
And what it has done ultimately, when you stand right back from it and look at it, you're seeing that Ireland is now transformed. It's no longer a country in which its economy is there to serve its people, which is what economies are supposed to be for. It's a piece of territory on which there is an economy in which outside interests come to participate. And the indigenous population are increasingly just spectators. Paying their taxes as or whatever, but not really being considered as to their belonging, their historical connection, their proprietorship of this country, and that's monstrous in my view. That that's been allowed to develop. And of course, one of the reasons it's been allowed to develop is that there's been no press to criticise it, because they're all in on the deal. But now that brings us back to Trump, like that. Well, Trump's going to have a different perception of all this and a different reason. But strangely, in a kind of weird way, Trump's interests and what I would regard as what our Irish interests ought to really be in this, they're coincidental here. Because if Trump does actually dismantle this element of the Irish economy, it'll be very painful for a period. But hopefully it'll do a number of things. First of all, we will draw into politics these guys who are running the country at the moment, who are completely toxic cretins, will go, because they won't be able to imagine a country run in a different way to what is being run as it is. So they will just run for the hills. Good riddance. And hopefully then there will be new people who will come in who will be capable of regenerating the Irish economy in accordance with its own mechanisms, its own lights, its own philosophies, its own history, its own kind of context. And in that sense, I think if Trump does and Harold Lutnick, his Commerce Secretary, what they're talking about or what they're hinting at, if that happens, I would regard that as doing Ireland a long-term favour. But not many Irish people will agree with me for at least the next 5, if maybe 10 years.
You mentioned Google. The refrain back is, the health service would collapse if it wasn't for all of this kind of stuff.
It's already collapsed, Gerry.
But what I would say, I'm not saying this has to stop tomorrow. What I'm saying is we need to plan our way out of this. And the worry for me is there's no oppositional force in Ireland in the political arena that is even thinking about these questions publicly anyway. No. In the way, we'll say, a UK Reform Party are kind of doing it in the UK, or whatever the MAGA movement began over in the United States, which has now resulted in...
Well, frankly, this should have happened years ago. I mean, this should never have been, this model of economics, FDI, foreign direct investment, the IFSC, financial services, etc. Fine, as an appendage to a functioning economy, which based on human endeavour, based on work. with a decent currency functioning, and then therefore a functioning economy for the good of the people of the country. That's what economics is about. There should have been a plan to regard all these elements as, useful, like Dermot Desmond saying, the FSC, as a booster rocket to get us off the ground. And then that we'd use this to look at what happened in China. China basically brought in all this American industry into itself. It let it set up. Then it looked over its shoulder, the guy's shoulders, as they were tippy-tapping, and said, "How are you doing that? Yeah, okay, yeah, okay. Now sling your hook, I can do that."
But I think what happened, that's a great example. It's a great example because I think the American model thought that the opposite would happen, is that doing this would bring greater kind of freedom and democracy into China, which it didn't at all do.
Not at all, because they don't regard freedom and democracy as useful. Interesting to go back to that concept of Mr. Musk's word. But, they find it. And in fact, Gerry, as you know, Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, who won basically 94% of all the debts in all the world, or at least managed them, he has said, amusingly, he says, democracy isn't really a good fit for the kind of capitalism we have going forward. Totalitarianism is better. So this is where this is where the World Economic Forum, this is where all these supranational organizations are nudging us. And this is my question now. Where does Trump really stand on this?
Well, he'll be tested, I think, on that question, because I think to take it another step, just on the economic front, is I think all of these people look at China and Russia and think, oh, I wish we could do things like that. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? And in a sense, they know they can't. The model as it exists, as broken and whatever, as corrupt as it is, can't compete with that.
No.
And that will eventually replace, what they're actually worried about is that will replace them, not anything that might come out of the democracies of the West, possibly.
That's a real fear that I would have as well, you see, because it's a strange paradox about watching what's happened in the last 5 years and knowing that our real enemies have not been China and Russia. They've been our own people, the leaders of Western powers, of the supranational organizations. So these are the guys we need to be concerned about. And that kind of instinctively, the human response is then to look to the other side of the line and to look to Putin and look to Xi and say, well, but then you think, no, that ain't going to work. Because that is incompatible with the Western way of being, I think, and ultimately. Now, Putin's philosophy is much closer to what I would regard as what should be Western society's philosophy, the West's philosophy. But the Chinese have their own system, and it suits the Chinese personality for all kinds of reasons. That's never going to work in the West. It's never going to work in America. It's never going to work in Ireland. It's never going to work in Britain or any France or Germany or any of those places. We've given away our democracy. We can still get it back. And that's the question. Fundamentally, that's the reason I am looking to Trump, because there's no other show in town now. And he has a chance of reclaiming Western democracy in the next 4 years. And I'm in for as long as it takes to decide whether that's going to happen or not.
Mm-hmm. When we talk about this kind of stuff, and bring the picture focus back to Ireland, I'm trying to think of, any political movement or person that's made a dent even in things. Possibly the only person you can say is Michael McDowell.
Yeah.
And you've written about, even at the weekend I was reading your piece on McDowell, and, to the average person in Ireland, McDowell looks like the resistance. We wouldn't classify him like that, but you would say his intervention in the referenda debate was
crucial.
Was the crucial last. Yeah. It was the goal that changed the momentum.
Yeah, because it needed a mainstream voice to go out there, and he's hugely articulated on illegal issues. Obviously, the thing about McDowell is he's an odd fish, right? Because he and I have rubbed each other up the wrong way for years and years and years, and yet I've always had this snaking regard for him. because he's got this kind of gnarled, in what we used to call gnarled integrity. You know, like he can be quite bitter and nasty in some ways, but he talks a lot of sense, and you always get the sense that behind him there's never malice, and there's always a good intention about achieving something useful and worthwhile. And he applies reason to these questions in a way that he stands out from the last 5 years in particular as somebody who seems to hold on to older values. Like, he seems to think freedom is important, freedom of speech. He understands that you can't have any kind of freedom unless you have freedom of speech. And that's why I think he stood up against the hate speech laws very successfully as well as the referendums. And so far, so good. And I think maybe critically, that would have been vital, because we got that element out of that legislation, that's hate speech as opposed to the hate crime thing. And there are elements that crept in, you know, to do with the gender stuff and all that are problematic, and the subjective stuff and so on, which need to be weeded out later. But McDowell did a lot in holding that back, because now I think that Trump comes in and you see Zuckerberg and these guys going in the other direction. I think that's going to die on the vine. I can't see them coming back up again. They'll find somebody else instead of McEntee, put him or her in there, and it'll be other business, I think. That's my hunch. But would I sleep easier if McDowell was Taoiseach? Certainly I would. Every night. Because you kind of think that he can be appealed to with reason, and you never get that impression with any of the others now that we've had to deal with. Radker, Martin, Harris, McEntee, all these guys, you know, they're just terrible, they're just dreadful. And McDowell, you think, well, when he speaks, he kind of makes sense. And now, he has blind spots, or if that's what they are. I don't know if that's what they are.
Well, I wonder, are they within the parameters of the way he consumes the world? You might say they're moral parameters. He operates in that morality.
Yeah.
I would question whether there are a few more parameters of morality to be concerning yourself to add into that equation now, that perhaps he isn't looking as being consequential. You know, when we talk about excess deaths or the whole pandemic era, he was curiously quiet for a former Attorney General.
He was.
Considering our testing of, you know, what freedom means with all of that stuff we did.
When we started doing the case back in 2020, April 2020, I mean, I kind of thought this is all right, because we're not going to have to go through with this, because other people, there'll be a queue, will be trampled to death in the round hall with the rush for people going in with their papers, and foremost among them will be Michael McDowell. I was certain of that, because that's his ethic, that's what he is, but he didn't. And nobody else did. And that tells you all about, you need to know about how totalizing the COVID thing was. And they all knew it. And he made some interventions then which kind of half-hearted later on, querying things, and he seemed to go a little bit against the second lockdown a bit, but then again AstraZeneca is taken off, and the vaccine, and he kicked up a stink about that, minor stink, saying that that's just not, and that all that reads kind of confusingly. And he has been silent about the access to it. I can't believe anybody who's aware of anything in this country now they have to be aware that we're up nearly 20%, roughly 20% over the last 4 years. That's a figure that is many orders of magnitude beyond what would be regarded as a serious crisis, would have been regarded as a serious crisis 10 years ago. If that level of death would be regarded as like hemorrhaging population for some unknown reason, if it was unknown, of course it's not. So I don't know where his head is there. Now, there is an issue here, there's an aspect here, and I don't have a word for it or an easy phrase for it, but it's something to do with being an oppositionist, being in opposition. And he is in a certain sense in opposition in the Shannon where he is, and he's very good at that. But there's a different sense in which opposition, like we on the outside, we can say things. When you're on the inside, there are different considerations, like there's the cohesion of the system, there's a question of order, there's a question of, the comity of politicians, and that they kind of nod to each other in support. A wink and a nod is as good to a blind horse, blah blah. But I don't think that's good enough, because this is such a grave, grave crisis. And it really is time that he got off the fence and started to speak about this, because that's the way I believe. There's a rumour, for example, that he's going to run for the presidency later on this year. And there was a poll in the Sunday Indo, I think last week, I've heard, in which he was neck and neck with Mairead McGuinness. Now, you know, Mairead McGuinness and Michael McDowell, I don't know how you'd start.
And well, however it starts, I'd be pretty confident I'd know how that particular two-horse race would finish. McDowell would run away with it in the end.
Yeah.
He'd have to, because Mairead McGuinness has been part and parcel of, as European Commissioner, of what's been going on. And my thing with McDowell is, it's like you're part of the system and you have to operate within certain parameters within the system. But at a certain point, you understand, you look up at the ceiling and you look at the walls and they're closing in on you.
Well,
because of an inability to break a fist through the system occasionally.
And furthermore, when you're living in a culture which is, you know, has a pseudo-reality pumping out 24/7, in other words, you have a completely corrupt media. He may not be even aware of that in these terms, but he does know that there are certain beliefs that the Overton window is pretty tight at the moment, you know, in terms of what people will accept. And therefore, if you're a mainstream figure like him, and you're going to come out and make a statement about what's happening, you're going to have to, it's like, you know, you want the bomb disposal unit with you, like, in order to take you through the various wires that you're going to need to snip in order to get this point across in a way that's not going to destroy you for all time. That's the thing that Trump was afraid of as well back in 2020, that if he came out as it would have been too late, he would have been destroyed, finished. And I think that's the thing that McDowell is facing here as well. Not that I don't know that he knows.
Yeah.
Because he must know, though. And I've no way of knowing that he knows, or even assuming that he knows. But I do think that he does have a conscience, a very strong conscience. He's not cynical. He's not in any way, you know, he's not even pragmatic in the normal sense. He's somebody who does believe in things. And, you know, as I say, you know, if you had, this is the way I would put it, Gerry, if we could have organised a velvet revolution in Ireland, in Dublin, and get 1 million people onto O'Connell Street one Friday evening in the rain, up there in Parnell Square there was a platform. Who would you want to walk out onto that platform to take the role, once the government had run away to the Wicklow Hills? Would be McDowell, to become Taoiseach by acclaim for, say, 6 months pending an election, like happened in Prague in 1989. That would be my dream. There's nobody else that, in my view, could do that, who could fill that function as well as he could. You know, you would go home that night and you would sleep the best sleep you had for years.
Yeah, it's not going to happen.
I think there's a better chance of Trump taking over the world.
But that was the thing that was going through my head is, and I think maybe the mainstream politicians need to prepare themselves. Part of the Trump-Musk axis, and now with Zuckerberg opening, you know, getting rid of all this fact-checking, is there's the winds of change blowing in here, and the opportunity for voices to emerge.
Yeah.
Is never going to be greater for, I don't know how long this window's going to last, by the way, but it's there. But I would have thought, as a mainstream politician who had a sense that things were on the wrong track, but they couldn't talk about it because the media weren't on board with it, X, Y, and Z, that there's going to be a growing opportunity to say what you think.
This is it, Gerry. I mean, this is what I feel. We're taking our seats in the theatre. You know, and we don't know what this play is about. We don't know what it's going to be. We don't know how long is it going to be. Is it 3 actor? Is it what? You know, and like we could be out of here in an hour, finished, and you know, a tragedy will have occurred or something. You know, I mean, like there are stories that there's a plan. You know, the Combine, the Predator class have a plan to launch not 1 but 2 new viruses on, I think it's the 22nd of January.
I didn't hear that.
This is the latest one. Now, that may well be possible. That is possibly their plan. They've talked about monkeypox and all this stuff before, but it never happened. Why? They can't do it. In other words, their viruses are no good. Mm-hmm. They're not good enough. Their vaccines are pretty lethal, but their viruses are not so good. And I think that's a disadvantage they have. One of the things that I keep running into is this idea, which in the movement, which has become really depressing, is that we're increasingly like that we're dealing with an omnipotent, omniscient force that cannot be beaten. So I say to people, well, why don't you just go home, pull the blinds and go to bed and wait for the knock on the door? We have to actually engage with the possibility that we have the power to defeat them. I refuse to be, as it were, bludgeoned into agreeing that Trump is hopeless and that he's a fraud and that he's all this other Zionist or whatever. I absolutely feel that we have to embrace this moment, even at the risk that we will be disappointed. Like, that's life. We're all the time. I mean, every love affair that somebody starts, you start off in exactly that situation, that you could actually be devastated for 3 years after 3 weeks. Mm-hmm. That's life. Mm-hmm. So let's trust Trump in this way. Let's trust Musk even in this way. I believe it's absolutely essential until such time as that trust is betrayed. I don't believe it will be. I don't think that whatever happens, it is going to be a betrayal by any of those people. Because I trust them in the sense that I have looked into their eyes, I've listened to them speak. They're not like the others. They're not like the people we're looking at in politics in Ireland or in Britain, like Starmer or Harris or Radker, these guys, these creepy people.
There's something different.
They're different people. They're more like us. They're more real. They're more, you feel they've come out of the same place as us in some sense. I don't mean economically, of course not. But that doesn't matter in this. Because when I hear Musk speaking, I don't hear somebody speaking down to me from some elevated position on account of his wealth. That's not, you wouldn't know he was a rich man.
He doesn't live his wealth, or he doesn't seem like, I'm not saying he doesn't have that cars or cruiser, but he behaves the way you'd say somebody that's addicted to doing what they do.
And he seems to worry about the same things as we do. I mean, even in the context of something that's his business is, AI now is part of that. He was one of the earliest to speak out about the dangers of AI and warn that we were going down a very dangerous path. And he subsequently said, well, I didn't get any support. But on the other hand, he's a very idealistic person. He belongs in the world. He belongs in our world. And he seems to have the same concerns as us about that world, even though he's operating at a different level in terms of the technologies and so on that he's dealing with. I really believe that it's going to be okay at that level. I think it's okay.
There's very few people that have had the level of public influence that he's had.
Yeah.
I have no doubt that is eroding his natural scruples. Like in the way it would anyone. I don't care. He's probably the most character I have my eyes on, because if he turns into something bad, things could get bad very quickly. And that would be my thing with him.
Well, you see, I try and think of how that might play out, and I can't imagine it. I'm trying to think, like, who would it be like that we know of?
No one.
It's a little bit like a man from Wicklow. What do you call that guy who came in as an independent after
Donnelly.
Donnelly. And he came in after the crash, and he was the guy on the white horse, and he was going to save us from the big dirty bankers and all that. And next thing he ended up as Minister for Health, basically wanting to lock up the country.
You could see the cravenness in him, because he went into the Social Democrats,
yes,
I think.
He did.
And then
Fianna Fáil.
He was looking for the power. Like.
Yes, he was. I don't think that's Musk. But yeah, you see, my fear there will be that he has dark ambitions. He has an idea of the future that isn't necessarily our idea, or my idea, or your idea, or anybody's idea, maybe. This is always the thing about evil doing, really. It's done by people who have good intentions. The most evil things come from people who are so certain that they're right. Stalin is a classic example. Stalin, possibly the most evil leader that ever the world saw in terms of the consequences of what his actions were. He was convinced that this was the only way to achieve what needed to be achieved for the betterment of the human race. And that's like C.S. Lewis said that something to that effect, that the worst kind of, the people who think they're, the people to be really afraid of are those who want to improve your life for you, and there's a lot of truth in that. At the same time, you see, somebody who has a sense of humour, Donnelly doesn't have a sense of humour at all.
No, none of them do, like Harris.
No.
Neil Martin, none of them like.
You don't. So Musk does. He's a very funny character, and so is Trump.
Considering that, I'd say you've written about him a lot, I've written about him a lot, and why we've kind of spent a lot of time talking about him, like over the past whatever, is that I'm kind of rooting for him. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I also have to be, I can't fall into the trap of rooting him past the point I should have been questioning him.
I agree, and that can happen, and there's no question is when you get carried away, you tend to follow the logic of what you've decided in the first place, and you can pursue it down dale and uphill. But at the same time, I think we're in a situation where we don't have any choices. This is the only show in town. We're here in our seats, we're waiting to see what happens. And if we're wrong, we're wrong. I mean, my old friend John Healy, a journalist who died some years ago, he was from Charlestown, a very great journalist. He had a saying, gloriously right or gloriously wrong. Don't hedge your bets. If you think something might happen, if you think it's good bet, say it. And if you're wrong, take the flak. That's life. But I really do feel in my gut that this is a good moment, and that what's going to happen, if there's no intervention to sabotage it, I think it will be really, really good.
I'm hopeful too, or I'm trying to be. I'm excited about the next 3 months. Whether what that excitement brings, I don't know. But it's definitely. There's one thing I wanted to ask you, because I was going through kind of some of the Irish substacks, and there's an element, I think, Patrick E. Walsh.
Oh, yeah.
And, this thing with RIP.ie and being purchased by the Irish Times. And now I'd looked at that purchase maybe when it happened at the time. And now this idea, they're introducing the fee. Obviously, that was a private source of data outside of the public domain that is now gone. You can't, I don't have any trust. I have no trust in any data coming out of.
No. Well, the Irish Times is a deeply untrustworthy organisation. It's a lying. It's a mendacious organisation. There's no question about it. It has been lying for years about lots of things. So there's no question about that, and that's a real problem now, because they will just change the language that they're using, and nobody will know that that's happened, and there's no control group. Although there is talk of other websites now starting up, which will be free of charge or will be minimal in charge, and that may in time. But in the short term, no, it won't be. It'll be very hard for Patrick to do the fine work he's been doing, I think that's a real problem.
And do you have a sense that was a strategic purchase?
Oh yeah. Definitely. I mean, everything they do, everything the media do, the media in the long run, I keep telling this to people, and you know it as well as I do, Gerry, that, the media is not the media. It's now an instrument of government. It's propaganda wing of government. And that's all. I mean, that's all they do. That's their job. That's how they make their living. People still think they buy the Irish Times and they're reading a newspaper. They're not. They're not reading the newspaper. They cannot trust it. I saw this to a friend of mine recently, and he looked at me like, "What? Really?" I had no idea. But it's obvious if you read it, if you look at it closely. Look at what's happening about the weather, the nonsense that they're telling us about, normal winter weather. Actually, quite a mild winter we've had, and suddenly it's the most appalling weather of all time. We're supposed to stay in and not risk our lives by going out and, Well,
it's actually, you bring the weather, and I'm just thinking of that. These forest fires in California, right? And of course, they've heavily affected some of the biggest kind of movie stars, TV stars, all this kind of stuff. And I read that Gavin Newsom, the governor of the state, announces we're putting a pause basically on all climate legislation in the thing to allow these people to rebuild. And while that's probably good, it just goes to prove the lie when it's particularly affecting people in their own stratosphere.
Yeah.
all of this stuff disappears.
Well, Victor Davis Hanson did an excellent review of the way that they had allowed the water supply to be diverted, and they had closed down all the forestry works and all this sort of stuff, and they're basically trying to turn the state into a nature reserve, you know, and that's now being put on hold, I think, but what a price. And this is, of course, you know, woke politics, basically the consequences manifesting, which is interesting and tragic in lots of ways, but this is the consequence of it. This is what happens. What they call diversity hires in all of the fire departments and all this sort of stuff. Just like, America lost its mind in the last 20 years. Really.
Oh, yeah, and I think we've seen it, and the fact that it lost its mind, that's not separate to us losing our mind.
No,
do you know what I mean? We wouldn't see this as an organic Irish losing of the mind of what's gone on here for the last 5 years.
But we've imported that as well, you see. And that's to our great detriment. And maybe one of the consequences of what's happening now is that will gradually thaw out and evaporate or something.